Hopefully you're going to be thanking me because Black Friday deals have come early for CityCast Chicago listeners. The Auditorium Theater is giving you, yes, you, the person listening right now, pay attention. They want to give you early access to their annual Black Friday ticket sale. All you got to do is use code CityCast to get 25% off tickets to shows like Home for the Holidays with Sleeping at Last, Drumline Live, Arrival from Sweden, the music of ABBA, and more. This is a limited time offer while supplies last, my friends, now through November 30th. Visit auditoriumtheater.org and use code CityCast for 25% off select tickets. I've been to no less than 15 weddings in my life, and one constant is every single person wants it to be one of the most special days of their life. And if you want to enjoy it without feeling like you're managing a whole event team, let Simply Elope do it for you. Simply Elope has helped over 14,000 couples, and no two weddings are ever alike. Your dedicated planner takes care of every detail, so whether you want a snowy mountaintop or a sandy beach at sunset, they'll handle the hard stuff. All you got to do is show up and say, I do. Start your big day at simplyelope.com. Today's holiday guide is from the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. You could join them this Friday for the 112th annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony live at Millennium Park. Also, make sure you stick around for after the interview for a quick conversation sponsored by Deborah's Place with board president Rosie Drumgoole about what makes their approach to housing unique. Today on CityCast Chicago, we're still dealing with the pain of closing 50 public schools 12 years ago. And since the city has been under a series of school closure moratoriums, the latest is in effect until 2027. But what happens when an independently run or charter school decides to close its doors and asks the district to step in? It's Monday, November 17th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I am joined by Becky Vivi, the bureau chief for Chalk Beat Chicago. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Jacoby.
This is a very difficult conversation because at least most people I know in the city don't like to talk about school closures. And recently, the school board voted on the future of Chicago High School for the Arts, also known as Chi-Arts, after talks of potential closure over the last few months, which honestly sent shockwaves between the school community, the teachers, the families and students. Ultimately, what was the school board's decision?
So the school board's decision is to keep Chi-Arts open as a district-managed fine and performing arts school. So it will still be an arts high school, which is one of the big draws that school has for young high school students who are interested in going into careers in the arts or studying the arts during high school.
What exactly were the financial troubles at the heart of this? And, prior to this vote, what was the position that leadership over at Chi-Arts was taking on this whole thing?
So Chi-Arts is a contract school, which is kind of like a charter school in that they operate through a contract with the school board, with the school system to run the day-to-day operations of the school, hire the staff, and hire, people to come in and provide programming. They had alluded to having some financial troubles in previous meetings, but it didn't quite reach the point that it reached until this fall when they informed CPS that they were not going to seek a renewal to that contract, which shocked and surprised many of the teaching staff and, of course, students and families at that school because they didn't think that it had gotten that bad. But to not seek a renewal from CPS essentially then left the question of, okay, CPS, can you run this school if we bow out, or will this just close as a program once the contract operator decided not to? This comes also, I should note, after the Board of Education made a decision last spring to save some charter schools whose operator did the same thing, and that was within the Acero network. So this decision from Chi-Arts to say, hey, we're not going to seek a renewal, I think then put the school board and the school district in a position of, oh my goodness, this is, do we Do we absorb this school as a district-run school? And in particular, because ChiArts has this unique model that is quite popular, it is a fully enrolled school. You have to audition to get in and apply. So it does. All high schoolers apply to high school kind of at this point, but
But you're auditioning to maybe go into like a creative writing track or dance, music, theater, visual arts, things like that.
yeah. So again, very popular program. What makes that school also unique is, and I think one of the unanswered questions at this point, even though the board has voted to create a district managed school in this exact same location with the exact same name, is whether or not the ChiArts Foundation, which has helped fund the specialty programming that children get through what is known as the conservatory model, if they will be able to continue to fundraise that money privately through the foundation and support that conservatory, because there's nothing like that quite exists in CPS. And so there was some discussion about how will the conservatory continue. The district officials told us that it has an estimated $5.5 million annual cost to run. The amendment that was voted on does include language that would establish funding sources, with CPS providing half the investment and the ChiArts Foundation providing another half of the investment, and that the foundation would continue to raise part of that money through just philanthropy. And if those philanthropic targets aren't met, the district would then have a mechanism to sort of reevaluate the sustainability of the conservatories.
This is great news for the ChiArts school community. I know there are a lot of people listening who have heard you and I, me and some of your colleagues talk all year about the type of financial pressure CPS is under. So where does the money to help transition and then hopefully to help sustain ChiArts, where does that come from in the grand scheme of things when we're looking at CPS's budget?
Sure. So some of it comes directly from what the district currently gives to the third-party provider. So charters and contract schools are still funded on a per pupil basis in the district. So presumably any money that the district had budgeted for the students that were enrolled under this privatized model would continue to just form the basis for that new district managed schools budget. But the reality is that there's not necessarily little pots of money to have the district suddenly start absorbing all of the privately managed charter and contract schools that are in the public system. So I think what's interesting about what happened here with ChiArts and what happened with Acero in the spring is that you have the board making decisions that are certainly, in the best interest of students and communities who want to see these schools continue to operate, but do come with some financial costs and do raise questions for the district. Again, we've talked about this on the show before, Jacoby, in a district with declining enrollment overall, how is the district supporting the 650 plus schools it has? And can it then keep, can it afford to absorb them and directly manage them all themselves?
We'll talk a little bit more about the kind of logistics, what happens when one of these schools closes. But at the same time, the board was voting on ChiArts. Epic Academy, a charter school in South Chicago, was also in limbo and had a vote taken on whether or not to close that school. Did they fare the same as ChiArts?
They did not. And this raised some pretty significant concern from a number of board members. So Epic Academy does not have the same enrollment as ChiArts.
About half, maybe, right? There are about 560 students at ChiArts and about 244 largely Black and brown students at Epic Academy.
Exactly. And Epic Academy, it's a very intriguing history that I won't go into here, but they had in the last few years big plans to they actually did purchase an old Catholic school and bought this building that they were going to completely redo and renovate and build up. And that whole plan essentially seems to have fallen through, and not only fallen through, but put Epic Academy's operators in a position where they also came to the board and said, we aren't going to keep running this school. So you have a decision to make, CPS. Do you take it on as a district managed school. When we first heard the news about Epic Academy, the leadership there said that that was what they kind of asked of CPS. They said, we would like you to take over this campus and run it as a district run school. And effectively, the district, they also raised the specter that the school might have to close mid-year if they ran out of their cash flow and their funds. To avoid that from happening, the board voted to essentially provide Epic with $1.4 million to finish out the school year. But they also made the decision, based on the recommendation of district officials, to not continue operating that school as a district-run school and to instead do what they've done in the past when schools close, which is direct students to other nearby campuses. Now, this was also a big conversation at the meeting, and the vote was actually pushed off and rescheduled because board member G2 Brown was trying to insert language near the kind of last minute to say, if we're going to do this, we want to be able to have these students attend better performing schools and have their teachers that work at Epic be guaranteed jobs at those same schools where those kids get reassigned to, which then raised a number of questions from other board members saying, well, how are we going to do that? How do we guarantee those jobs? And would that violate our agreement with principals to give principals autonomy in hiring their teaching staff? So that caused some sort of drama, if you will, in the boardroom. But I thought what was really interesting was when the actual vote came down, there was a decision to remove language that board member G2 Brown had inserted about getting those students into higher performing schools. They struck the word higher performing, in part because that can be very subjective, and other board members felt like that would limit parents' choices, children's choices of where they want to go to school, and how would we define higher performing. But I think where that came from is years of research that Brown and myself and others are very familiar with that shows when schools close and kids get sent to other schools, they generally do not fare better academically. And oftentimes in the first year, they fare worse, with one exception. If you were moving to a school that was like one of the top 25% schools in the district, those kids did better. And so I think his intention was to try to give, if we're going to close this school on these kids, can we give them not just a marginally better option? Can we give them like a really great path to make sure that they still have, that their whole high school career trajectory doesn't get thrown off by this closure?
And I completely understand the kind of line of reasoning there, wanting to make sure students not only transition as effectively as possible, but for many of them, hopefully could have some of their teachers, some of the people they've built these relationships with. But to your point, that seems potentially like a difficult undertaking. I wonder, is there a tension when, you know, a charter school comes to the district and essentially asks them to save the school, given that at least in a few of the conversations we've had, particularly around like Chicago's current school board makeup, there feels to be this, we could call it a simplification, but this breakdown between sort of people who support neighborhood schools and people who maybe support school choice and school voucher and the expansion of charter schools in the city. Does this create a unique tension when, again, no one wants a school to close in Chicago, but one is closing and again, the charter school network is asking the district to kind of bring in more money, and then, you know, school board members are trying to figure out, you know, where do these young people go next?
It's really, I do think it is a fascinating tension. In the past, I think that the assumption was sort of if a charter decides they can't keep going, they just close. And that's a charter decision that then that charter board makes. But in this case, there's like this third avenue now, which is like, well, we don't want it to close either, but like, would you consider running it as a district-run school? Which is pretty interesting when you think of the long arc of history as it relates to reform in Chicago and how for many years, as you mentioned, Jacoby, there are still people who, you know, believe firmly in choice and the expansion of choices. But as a district, we haven't really been opening new charter schools. The last one I think that was brand new that opened was maybe 2017 or 2018. And part of that is because of just the sheer demographic enrollment trends that we've seen. We don't have the same kind of overcrowding that we once had in certain neighborhoods that demanded this kind of growth in choice in charters, or magnets, if you will. And so it is really interesting that now we're seeing a new moment in that conversation where what was once a trend to sort of outsource and diversify the types of schools and who runs them, these operators some of them are saying, we don't want to operate schools anymore. We're going to hand them back to you, if you will.
Yeah. And because you are navigating around, but it also in that conversation, there's a lot of shitting on the district and saying, these are better options and pull your kids out of sort of the neighborhood schools. You mentioned earlier this year, the school board voted to save 5 out of 7 Acero charter schools facing closure. Overall, is this becoming a trend? These charter schools or these privately managed schools on the brink of shuttering? And if so, what's driving this?
Well, I think they're facing the same sorts of financial headwinds that districts are facing. So, post-COVID, there was a lot of COVID recovery money floating around. Everybody seemed to be doing fine. We are now, the deficits that the district was facing, all those independent operators, run their own nonprofit boards that run these schools and networks of schools within the system. They were also facing similar shortfalls. So in the case of Acero, it was the same sort of thing. They've got labor costs going up, but they've got revenue coming down, and it wasn't like the district gave them increases in their per pupil beyond, I think, some sort of marginal cost of living amount. And they looked at the numbers and just said, we can't operate. Acero was a network of 14 schools, and they were going to close half their network, which may have been kind of drastic, but then they ended up essentially closing 2 and handing 5 over to CPS to run as district-run schools. And so I think you see all these financial headwinds happening at a time when the expansion of these privately operated public school models is just no longer seen as sort of the solution.
This time of year is about tradition for people, and you can make Symphony Center a part of yours. From radiant choral harmonies to unforgettable orchestral moments, Symphony Center helps bring your traditions to life. You can experience the pure magic of Chanticleer's holiday concert, spanning ethereal chant to spirited gospel, or partake in familiar carols and festive favorites at Merry Merry Chicago, Symphony Center's annual holiday extravaganza, and revel in the timeless artistry of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra with performances that capture the wonder of the season. Discover the joy in every note, find your perfect holiday program, and get your tickets today at cso.org/holidays. The holiday season is in full swing, and one of my favorite ways to celebrate low-key is rolling by Millennium Park. When it's all extra pretty, decked out in the lights. And a perfect time to stop by is Chicago's 112th annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony on November 21st. Maybe you want to meet up with your friends, bring your family outside. Maybe you got some people in town early for Thanksgiving. Go on, kick it with your fellow Chicagoans for a night of sparkling lights, holiday cheer, and make some memories with one of the biggest trees this side of the Mississippi. And if you can't wait that long, kick off the season early, starting Friday at 10 a.m. at the McCormick Tribune Ice Skating Rink, and then head over to Millennium Park Holiday Market at noon. The market runs all weekend, and you can find great gifts for everybody in your life and soak in the live entertainment all in a nice festive winter wonderland. And hey, I heard that the Allstate man gonna be out there signing autographs. Nah, I'm messing around. The Enchanted Market experience is made possible with the support of Allstate. Don't miss out. Embrace the holidays at Millennium Park. For more info, visit chicago.gov/holidays. You already know what time of year it is. Toy Soldiers, Sugar Plums, and a Rat King. The Joffrey Ballet's The Nutcracker is making its way back from December 5th through the 28th at Lyric Opera House. Joffrey's Nutcracker is one of Chicago's most beloved holiday traditions. Join Marie and her Nutcracker Prince on a fantastical adventure in Tony Award-winning Christopher Wheeldon's kaleidoscope reimagining set amidst the spectacle of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Marie awakes one Christmas Eve to be swept away by a flurry of snowflakes to the dreamlike fairgrounds of the world's Columbian Exposition, and she embarks on a magical adventure you'll never forget. Seriously, the Trib calls it unforgettable. Tickets for the Nutcracker are on sale now at joffrey.org. We have two varying set of circumstances here. On the one hand, when the two Acero schools or an Epic Academy closes, right, the impetus is to move those students into other schools. But does the district have a responsibility to those principals, those teachers, those board members? And in the same way, when they choose to bring in a school, the Acero School or Shy Arts, I guess a similar question: what happens to those teachers, principals, board members?
Right, exactly. So that was part of the amendment I referenced earlier that G2 Brown had introduced, had two parts to it. And one was that whole high-performing question, where the kids go, but it was also, where do the staff go? Most charter agreements that school boards hold with charters or privately operated campuses, that's one of the autonomies that those charters get, is that they can have freedom to hire whoever they want, and that those teachers don't necessarily have. Historically, they were not part of the CTU. The CTU has organized teachers at several charter campuses, including Acero and Epic and Shy Arts. These are all campuses that have CTU bargaining units. They have their own contracts. So there's different rules that will govern what happens to those staff. And part of what was passed on the Epic question did give them sort of some, I would say, hiring preference at new schools, but not necessarily, again, guaranteeing them a position at another school in the district. Whereas if you worked at a district-run school and you got let go from your district-run school, if you had tenure, you would have some protections that allowed you to follow those students. But that's the thing. I mean, even when we closed back in 2013, even when the district closed 50 schools, there were special, unique agreements to those closures about what happened to the staff in each of those buildings. And I mean, anyone who's taught, including you, Jacoby, the summer, people change jobs over the summer all the time. There can tend to be those changes. But if it's not a situation where you wanted to leave your school, or again, let's say you're a teacher at Epic who's been there for many years, it wasn't probably in your plan to be applying to new jobs next summer. And that's likely what they will have to do, even if they get preference at district-run schools or specific district-run schools where the students get assigned. They're not necessarily going to have the same protections. For the most part, I believe they're trying to, in Shy Arts, those staff will be able to keep their jobs. Don't quote me on that, of course. If someone's listening and they're like, well, I'm not going to get to, I think that the devil will be in the details come next summer as they start doing the transition. But I think at least with Shy Arts, they were trying really hard to minimize disruption in the same way that the Acero fight and ultimate decision on Acero was also to try to minimize disruption, first for the students and then for the staff.
I mean, I appreciate you reminding us of just how tremendously impactful not just one school closure, but 50 school closures can be on the entire city. Earlier this year, we did a series of episodes that kind of looked at what happens when a school closes, especially schools that are in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Given that many of these school communities, right, are preparing for a holiday break and have to come back and finish out the school year, sort of what happens next for Shy Arts and what happens next for Epic Academy in terms of this process of transition or shutting down?
So I'll start with Epic Academy. One of the reasons they wanted this vote to be taken when it was taken in November, or really October, they were aiming for, but it ended up getting taken in early November, is that the applications for the Go CPS applications to apply to other schools were due on November 14th, Friday. So that is a reason why, they really wanted a decision to be made on like, okay, will Shy Arts be open and will Epic Academy be open or closed? So that those kids would have the chance to like submit an application to choose anything different, anything in the whole world. They can apply. Go CPS allows kids to apply to any city school across the city. With the transition, I think what will be next, obviously, is for the Epic Academy families, is figuring out exactly where those students will go, and how, whether they applied through that Go CPS process, and if they didn't, where they would then go in terms of a reassignment, where the district will try to, offer them seats in nearby campuses. As it relates to Shy Arts, I think that also is something that looms over those students and families about the decision of like, do we stay or do we try to apply to another school? And then with the Shy Arts question, it's also about, I think, how will the district absorb that school? How will those staff become CPS and CTU represented staff? I think with the conservatory model too, a lot of the teachers under the conservatory model, as I understand it, they're not necessarily, they're kind of like contractors or, again, you've got like people who teach potentially unique art forms that come in 3 days a week or something. They're not necessarily like a classroom teacher in the traditional sense. I think there will be big questions about like, what happens to those positions? How do they carry those on under the conservatory model, but still operate under the rules and regulations and contracts, labor and otherwise, that CPS district managed schools have to follow? So there's a lot of details I think that Shy Arts will have to figure out in conjunction with the district office that will generally support their move into being a district managed school.
Is there anything different politically? We kind of talked functionally about some of the differences when a charter school closes versus a district school. Is there any difference politically? Because again, I know for a lot of people listening, they were like, I thought there was a moratorium on school closures until like 2027, right? But that's something that's over Chicago public schools. And it feels like the conversation around these schools, we're obviously covering this every single day, but I don't know if it gets the same attention across the city as when, the mayor and the school board are considering whether or not to close district-run schools.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question on the moratorium question, because to the people on the ground, it feels like a closure, and a closure is a closure. But I'll go back to the wonky, like, these are schools run by third-party contractors, essentially, and they came to the board and said, we're not seeking renewal. So it's a little bit, there's like some technicalities there that make it so that this isn't, again, it's not necessarily subject to the moratorium, which I should note, the state law moratorium did expire at the start of 2025. The current one is one that the board voted on. It's the board policy that was put in place under Martinez, the former CPS CEO, who was trying to before he got fired, he was like, I'm not going to close schools, because there was some worry that maybe he was. And so in terms of the politics around closing, I think this pressure for the board to absorb these schools and not let them close certainly exists, in part because of their very own declaration under that moratorium that, hey, we're not going to close schools. But what do you do when an independent operator comes and says they want to close a school?
Yeah. I mean, given that the moratorium on school closures passed by the board itself would be up in 2027. Did we learn anything about this particular school board? I know we got some elections to come up and they won't look the same in some years. And by the time 2027 rolls around, but did we learn anything about this board's appetite for school closures, given that there have been reports over the last few years that between under enrollment, lack of resources, right? These conversations we've been having for decades, that there are other school communities inside the district that are worried that this could be their fate in due time. Did we learn anything about what this hybrid board is thinking on school closures?
Yeah, well, I would say it's been very interesting to see even people who I thought might be open to letting a charter close because they weren't big fans of charters, stepping in and saying, no, 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 I don't like closures more than I don't like charters. And so I think we certainly learned about this board that, given the choice between the two of them, their distaste for school closings is stronger than their distaste for privately run charters. I mean, I think even G2 Brown at the board said, it's not that I don't like charters, it's that I don't like the charter industry. So in some ways, like getting the operator out of the picture is probably a good solution for someone like him. This board, this hybrid board, which is still, by virtue of its appointees, controlled by the mayor, is very much in that camp of not interested in closing schools at any given point in time, no matter their type. I do think that 2027 looms and 2026, we'll have school board elections in the fall of 2026, which is already a year from now, Jacoby, if you can believe it. And then we have the mayoral that'll happen a few months after that in the spring of 2027. And I think you could certainly see people who are maybe more pro-choice, maybe more fiscally conservative, who see some of these decisions as being fiscally not sound and that it just adds more costs. You might see more candidates emerge from those political ideologies. But I do think that the sentiment generally has been and will continue to be, at least for the next year, like we're not planning closures. We're not interested in doing that, even though we know we have these enrollment challenges.
And then I guess this is just a question that kind of builds on the narrative around the forthcoming school board elections. This most recent one did feel like it came down to this sort of invest in neighborhood schools or sort of, allow for the expansion of charter schools or school choice, however we, sort of frame that conversation. Given, 3 different independent school networks just in this year having to come to the board and, essentially hope to be saved, do you think that that's going to be the dominant narrative for the school board elections come next year?
That's a really good question. I think that the school board elections candidate and incumbent positions on closing schools, whether they are neighborhood schools or charter schools, will continue to be like a voting issue for people that people will vote on. And if a candidate says that they're for that or against that, that will influence whether or not someone would vote for them. I also think it's been interesting to see how people who are pro-choice, pro-charter folks also, of course, in these instances, voted to save these schools or wanted to save these schools or wanted to come up with a plan that, protected the kids and the staff as best possible. So I do think that will be a dominant political issue. I also think these board members and any future candidates' stances on how to manage the budget will also dominate, which this issue, touches on the budget, as all of them do. But I think that the school board elections are certain to be spicy.
And then one final question. In the years since Chicago Public Schools shuttered 50 schools, has the district improved its process for helping students, families, teachers, school communities go through this? Are there improved services, improved processes for families, for teachers?
So I would say that they learned a lot, yes, since the mass closings of 50 schools in 2013. I think there is an example that many people point to, former leaders, current leaders will point to the closure of 4 Englewood high schools and the construction of the new single Englewood STEM high school as going smoother than the previous closures had. It wasn't perfect, and it still caused a lot of, I think, pain in that community in various ways, but you had this, shiny new school to look forward to, a new school model that was a choice in that community that, a lot of students decided to opt into. And so I think that the district has learned a lot, and I think they do, if they are to embark on consolidations, which would mean closures due to enrollment losses that have occurred in many communities. I do think that you have a lot of people downtown who would like to take more of that Englewood approach where they can, spend a year or two or more engaging with the community on what that consolidation plan could look like and how it would, lead to this, like, whatever the theory around, like, the phoenix from the ashes kind of situation, like lead to something that would provide higher quality or better school options, school facilities, what have you, in communities that have really been more subject to closures than a lot of other communities have.
As always, I appreciate you making time for the podcast. Bureau Chief for Chalk Beat Chicago, Becky Vevea, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I hope it was helpful.
Up next, we have a quick conversation with the good folks over at Deborah's Place.
Hey, it's CityCast Chicago executive producer Simone Alicea here. Deborah's Place has been helping women in Chicago find stability for 40 years, offering not just housing, but a real sense of belonging. I'm talking with board president Rosie Drumgoole about what makes their approach unique and how her own story inspires her work. Rosie, welcome to CityCast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So for listeners who might not know, what is Deborah's Place and how does it support women experiencing homelessness here in Chicago?
Our mission is to support women who are experiencing homelessness in Chicago. We are Chicago's largest and longest running provider of permanent supportive housing for single unaccompanied women experiencing homelessness. We've been doing this for 40 years at this point. We empower women to achieve housing stability, independence, and healing through housing, supportive services, education, and community. And that's why 90% of the residents remain housed after they are placed.
At Deborah's Place, y'all say that housing is the beginning, not the end of the journey. What does that mean in practice for the women that Deborah's Place serves?
It's this idea that housing is a right. Housing should come first. And the way that Deborah's Place approaches this is that, hey, you should get housing no matter what. Everybody deserves a home. It's a trauma-informed approach. It's a harm reduction approach. And at the end of the day, it leads to long-term stability. When we think about this population, right, single, unaccompanied women, right, like they are so vulnerable and they have so many systemic barriers, and they have, some of them come with, disabilities, mental disabilities, physical disabilities. They deserve belonging. They deserve a place to lay their head. They deserve a place to call home. And we all do. And once you have that foundation, you have that bedrock of, at the end of the day, you're going to have somewhere to sleep that's safe and that's yours. You can then start to thrive and grow.
Rosie, you bring such a personal perspective to this work, both as board president and someone with lived experience. How does that shape the way you lead and connect with the women that you serve?
I know what it's like to not have a place to put your head at night, not know where you're going to sleep tonight. I know what it's like to have all your belongings be in a garbage bag. When I then sit and I can talk to some of those young women. And so just having that conversation and being able to draw their personalities out and see how they light up, right? Like that just kind of motivates me to continue to want to advocate for this organization and that work. Because I identify with them. I can see myself in them. And honestly, like all of us are, just one something away from, being maybe in the same situation that they're in, and we just don't even know it. And so, it's one of those things that is just very near and dear to my heart. This is the organization that, I wish, I had access to when I was a young woman who was experiencing homelessness. And so to be able to work with the organization, to be able to provide support, whether it's financial or whatever the case may be, visibility, just, feels like something I'm giving to, little Rosie.
November is Homelessness Awareness Month. I don't know how many Chicagoans are familiar with that, but what is Deborah's Place doing to amplify this awareness month and amplify homelessness awareness in the community?
We're wearing a lot of purple.
That's the color. Okay, that's good to know.
That's the color. You know, for those of us who like to match, right? Purple's the color. We have a whole month of activities that are scheduled, staying plugged into our social media because there'll be a lot of other events that are coming up. The staff is definitely going to be posting different things because it feels like homelessness is one of those things that people try not to see. It's one of those things that can feel invisible. We oftentimes just kind of walk by people and just, don't, or act like we don't see them, or, treat folks as though they're not our neighbors, when in fact they are. So, making sure that we are, doing what we can to take care of our neighbors, even those neighbors who aren't housed, right, are still our neighbors. And we want to bring awareness to that, and we want people to support.
Rosie Drumgoole is the board president for Deborah's Place. Rosie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You can find details and ways to get involved at deborahsplace.org. We'll have a link to that in our show notes as well.
Before we get out of here, some good news. One of my favorite annual art shows is back again, the 12 by 12 show at Elephant Room Gallery. It's exactly what it sounds like. Artists from across the city paired together in a one-of-a-kind exhibit where they're all showcasing their unique talents and nothing more than a 12 by 12 canvas. 10% of the proceeds go to World Central Kitchen. I have found some of my new favorite artists there. Hopefully you get the same luck. I'll drop a link in the show notes. And don't forget to visit our website, chicago.citycast.fm, where you can subscribe to our daily newsletter, check out our events calendar, sign up to become a CityCast Chicago neighbor, where when you join up in our membership campaign, you're going to get ad-free listening, access to neighbors-only events, and the knowledge that your financial contribution directly contributes to this entire infrastructure. And we want to keep it going as long as possible, including bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.
Guess what? CityCast has some news. I'm Sean McPherson, the host of CityCast Twin Cities.
And I'm Jane Sihu, and I'm the host of CityCast Seattle. Hey, if you have a friend in one of our cities, can you text them for us?
Yeah, something, simple like, hey, how's that rash doing? And do you listen to podcasts? Because I have one you're definitely going to like. After that, tell them that CityCast has helped you become more informed, more involved, and more connected to your amazing city.
We're going to help that person you know in Seattle who's been trying to make friends.
And we're also going to do that for that guy you only kind of knew in college who moved back to the Twin Cities after graduation.
Don't we all have that guy?
Yeah, and usually that guy is named Todd.
So did you text them yet?
Jane, let's just wait a minute. We don't want to rush anybody. We'll do a little small talk. How's everything going in Seattle?
Beautiful, beautiful. Fall leaves popping. How about Twin Cities?
Today, beautiful and sunshiny in St. Paul. Okay, Jane, I bet they are done texting by now, and I just want to remind them, hey, you, please tell that friend to subscribe to CityCast Twin Cities or Seattle, wherever you get your podcasts.
Or if you don't want to text them and you're really just on Instagram sending them DMs all the time with like funny videos, send them a DM of our latest videos. You can find us at CityCast Twin Cities or CityCast Seattle on Instagram. Thanks.